Hi, and welcome to the CSAE podcast, Best Minds in Association. I'm your host today, Heather Toon, and with me is BrianScott of ClearTone Consulting for our third in a series of podcasts on technology. Today, we're going to be talking about common gotchas. Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Heather. It's so good to be back. And it's only 3 series. We could go on for, 5, 6, 7.
You could have a whole podcast on it.
That's right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for imparting all your wisdom on us.
Happy to do it. And today is kind of like a nice third or final part of the program, because it's going to be the things that I see the most often, right? That people just kind of like forget or are not kind of aware of. So I've got I think 14 really good common gotchas that we can go over.
All right, let's do it.
Should we start?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, number one, this is a common problem, thinking that cybersecurity is an IT problem and an IT problem only, right?
Sure.
It's really primarily, it's an executive problem and it's an employee problem as a whole, first and foremost. And let me explain why that's such a big difference, because we all know that, trickle down, right? Whatever executives really value and what's important to them, that's what's important to the organization, right? So if executives and leadership as a whole, right, of any organization and associations, if they're not focused on the importance of cybersecurity, and there's some other these numbers below here that we'll talk about what that means, right? How do they demonstrate that focus? But if they're not, then their employees are not. And as we've talked in our previous episodes, the employee is the human firewall, right? They are the first and most important defense to any organization for cybersecurity. So if your employees aren't taking it seriously or think it's their problem to deal with, then obviously your organization is not protected. So it's got to start at the top every single time. Unfortunately, I far too often I see that not being quite the place, right? Makes sense. I mean, it's tech stuff. People think, we got an IT group or we have a MSP that, it's their problem, but it's not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And that kind of trickles right down into the next one, which is if an organization's business plan, if their strategy does not include an IT strategy or an IT plan as part of that strategy, then chances are that means they're really not going to have cybersecurity as part of that plan, as part of that focus, right? And they're going to be at risk to something, right? Just not paying attention in the right areas that they ought to be paying attention into.
Okay.
And so, I've seen organizations come where they have their plan, and sometimes they'll have a side little plan. Sometimes that's an IT plan that's kind of separate from their organizational plan, or they won't have it at all, right? It's just like, oh, I don't know. Again, we've got an IT guy and he kind of figures it out for us, or a group, and that's not putting it in the light and in the importance that it requires to be effective against cybersecurity.
Okay.
And then thirdly is the last one that kind of really deals with at the leadership level, which is, and we've talked about this, and I'm calling it turn on the lights, right? If they're not doing an annual assessment of where they are in their cybersecurity preparedness, then an organization's leadership doesn't really know, where they're weak, if they have strengths, where their strengths are, if they have weaknesses or gaps, what those are. And so how can you make a plan or have accountability of an IT group to make a plan if we don't really know where we're failing, right? And so those first 3 are really all about the leadership of an organization. Sorry, CEOs and EVPs out there, but it really does fall on you guys to get everything in line there.
Sure.
Number 4, there is some rhyme and reason to this order, but number 4, sometimes even when groups do some of the above, then they try to do it all themselves, right? As opposed to really hiring seasoned professionals to do some aspects of this, right? And there's some risk in that, right? Cybersecurity in general and technology changes so fast. It's constantly evolving. If you talk to any technology or security professional, they're learning something. They're just constantly reading, learning, studying for some next certification or something. It's just this ever evolving space. And so your really only chance to have a good plan and to execute those plans well, to be secure, is to use a professional that's dedicated their lives, their careers to that knowledge space, right? If you're trying to do it a little bit on the cheap and a little bit on the side, and we've got someone who helps us with computers, and he's interested in it, so we'll kind of let him lead the way, you're probably going to have some gaps in there, right? They're just not going to be aware. Nothing wrong with those individuals, and we love people, that have a passion and an interest in technology. It's just an impossibility if you're not dedicated to it in a full-time way to really know everything that's going on.
And for those smaller associations, though, that maybe are truly volunteer led, and what could a solution be like that for the smaller ones that don't have a budget to have a full-time staff member?
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a full-time staff member, right? I mean, it could be. So in fact, most associations I deal with have very limited if no IT individuals, right? But they have a company that's providing that. And so MSP stands for managed service provider. So most of them, if they're using computers and their computers need to work, they usually have an MSP that takes care of them for them, right? Who do you call if you have an issue on your computer? And those MSPs, most MSPs today provide some level, and usually a pretty good level, of security services and information around that. So they have to rely on their vendors. Now, there's a lot of small MSPs that I think are, they're kind of regional, local to areas. There are sometimes a small number of people there, 2, 3, 4 people that work at the MSP, right? It starts to get a little concerning sometimes there, because they just don't have the bandwidth and the time necessarily, maybe to be as complete and comprehensive in all areas. So you want to make sure you're using a good vetted vendor, that's proven themselves in business with lots of customers, sizable enough. Now, sometimes that does, affect your cost a little bit. There is a reason why people go with, small kind of mom and pop shops. They're usually less expensive, but just understand that there could be some risk involved in that.
And on the flip side, there could be some risk in just do your homework, basically.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, larger MSP organizations, they have to be following good security practices themselves, because if they have a security incident or a vulnerability on their side, well, that actually, now their customers are now at risk, right? And in fact, there's many, many cases out there where it's the vendors that were compromised that ended up getting to some other company, like the big one, Target. That was a huge compromise. Well, that was through a vendor, right? Where a vendor had an issue, and there's a lot of them that are like that. So yeah, you want to make sure that when you're talking to your MSP or your technology vendors about your own security, have them talk about theirs, right? What are you guys doing? What can you provide me that really builds my confidence that you're doing what you need to do, right, to protect your stuff and my stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so let's get into number 5, and that is not having a really solid and tested backup plan. It's inevitable, pretty much, that you're going to either get some kind of malware, a virus of some sort, or ransomware is going to be introduced into your computing environment. It's a matter of time. If it hasn't happened already, it's going to happen pretty soon. And so the easiest way to recover from things like that is you kind of, let's say a computer gets a ransomware, and it starts encrypting that computer, and it spreads maybe to a shared file server, and starts encrypting that. You shut those things down, basically, right? So that it stops spreading. And then you basically just rebuild them from a backup. Like, you don't go in and try to, let's try to figure out where that virus is, or deal, how do we deal with that ransomware malware? You just blow them away and start fresh, right? So that way, that's the only really way to know that you've gotten rid of those types of things. In order to do that, you have to have a good backup plan. You have to be backing up all of your information. You have to know, how often you're backing it up, backing it up often enough that you're not losing too much, and then you recover from there. And you have to have your staff trained to know that they shouldn't be storing important files locally on their laptops and on their desktops, right? Because those aren't backed up in those ways. It should be either in file servers that are backed up or cloud storage. Like maybe the company has decided to use Google Drive or something in Microsoft like Teams or SharePoint. That's the approved location to save organizational information, because it's either redundant and it's backed up and it's protected, right? And so often either they don't make organizations don't take their backups that seriously, and they bring up a new drive somewhere and they don't have it backed up, or they back it up once a week. You could lose a lot of work in a week, right? Mm-hmm. Or they don't train their employees to not save their stuff locally. And almost everyone's employees all their employees are saving to their C drive, and then it gets infected or they lose their laptop and that work's just gone and there's no way to get it back. And so basically the whole concept of backup is an important thing to get into.
I was actually writing backup computer. I save everything to a cloud anyway, but just in case.
Yeah. Well, cloud storage has really revolutionized that, right? And it's the way to go. It's not only does it have some redundancy built into it, and you can even do backups of cloud as well, but you can access it anywhere, right? So which is great. And it's
could your cloud be infected?
It can, but those companies spend a lot of time and money working really hard to recognize those things early. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I had a customer today whose Microsoft OneDrive had stopped syncing and said, I'm not going to sync because I've detected an issue with a file that you have locally, right?
Wow.
And then we were able to go in and figure that out and fix it. So they're pretty smart, right? Because they have to be, because there's so much garbage and malware out there. Sure. So and believe me, the like the Microsofts and all of these large companies, they have pretty significant investment in their cybersecurity teams, right, to try to keep you safe.
So your small subscription price per month is worth it.
Yeah, that's right. No doubt. Definitely worth it. All right. Well, let's move on to number 6. Not forgetting, as we spoke about in the past, that 91% of all of these compromises out in the world start with phishing, right? They always start at the person. That means you really have to have a robust phishing training, testing and training program for your employees. They should be tested at least monthly. You should send these fake phishing emails. Those who fail need to watch videos on it every single time. You need to have reporting on it to know who's failing, who's not, make sure they're watching these videos. And then when you hire new people, they need to start with the training videos. They need to start with a base level of understanding around phishing, right? So it's
if building. If you're wondering what services you could use for those test emails, we mentioned it in the second episode. So go back and listen to that one, or you can go to the show notes and the links in there.
Yeah, and it's one of the most popular ones that's out there. That's called knowbefore.com. But there's several, right? If you could Google phishing training and platforms, and you can find several of them. So not only should training occur when you hire someone, right? And then there should be ongoing training, but there really ought to be annual security training too. And this kind of comes back to the organizations, the executives' commitment to security, right? So if you really want to make sure that the company, the organization knows you're serious about it, then every year, just like when you started, people should go in and, it's usually a 10, 15-minute video that just refreshes, because things change, right? Information changes. You want to keep it new and up to date. And so I think the organizations that are most at risk are typically are organizations that don't put that kind of emphasis, on it. And so I think an annual training is the lead. 15 minutes a year is not much to ask for something as important as this.
Sure.
All right. So the next sets of things really kind of get into some more aspects of what your IT team or your vendors that are providing IT services to associations should be doing for you, right? And so if you wanted to have a discussion with your vendor, these are some good things to write down, to check and say, hey, how are you dealing with this, right? What's going on in this area? Because these should be things that are really common for these groups to be providing for you. So the first one is called the vulnerability scan. And there are systems out there that have automated from being outside of your organization, outside meaning from the internet perspective, looking in. So however, every organization has some internet facing access, like maybe it's a VPN where you VPN into the company to get into maybe some files stores that are in there. Maybe it's their website. Maybe they have an e-commerce site that they put up, or maybe they're hosting locally some other software that people need to get, to remote into to work with, right? So all of those are doors or windows that could be open or closed right into that organization. And so a vulnerability scan takes a massive list. It's like, 15,000 known vulnerabilities that are out there. It's probably even more than that now. And it looks at all of these windows that you have, and it tests every single one of them for you, right? And it finds any kind of gaps that you would have. It's inexpensive, it's easy to do, it's quick, but it really turns the lights on from the outside perspective, looking into your organization on where you might have weaknesses. Then the other thing is MFA, multi-factor authentication, so two-factor authentication, right? That should not only be on your email, and it should definitely be on your email, but if you do have network accessibility, like through a VPN, to do work interior, it should be on your network as well. And so, luckily, that's a really high number now. Most organizations have turned that on because it's so effective. Most of them almost all of them have turned it on for email. Less have turned it on at the network level, right? And so that's something that again, their vendors can help them do. Very easy to do. It's literally just some configuration, right? Doesn't cost any money to do it, but it certainly creates a much higher barrier for anyone who's trying to get into your systems. Next would be, all right, well, if we've turned on multi-factor, for our email and our networks and things like that, well, why not leverage that with any potential third-party apps that you might be using, so that we get that added protection as well. So for example, ADP, right? It's a very, very common HR and payroll system. And there's a lot of users of ADP. Well, that's using ADP is using a third-party system that's on the web. Well, you can go about that a couple different ways. You can have your staff make their own accounts, or have their own ADP accounts that they have to use, and there's not two-factor authentication involved in that. Or you hook up with single sign-on. You hook up your organization's authentication provider right to that system, and so you use that account. So, for example, if I worked for an organization, let's call it CSAE, right, .org, right, and I worked for that, and I had an account for that, that would be the account I'm using to get into ADP. But it uses that system and including the two-factor to do it. Sounds a little complex, I know, but these third-party systems like ADP and Concur and all of the Workday, I mean, all of these big third-party systems, they all do this every single day. They turn on this single sign-on capability, to your identity provider. And so if you have a vendor or an IT staff, they'll be able to work with them. It's not too difficult to do. But that really kind of extends, not only is it a nice handy thing for your staff because they get to use the account they always use, to get in, but it really then extends that multi-factor into all of those systems, right? And locks it down even more. So that's a good thing.
Nice.
Couple of more, and then we're almost through. We've got 4 more to get through. Changing default passwords. So not only every piece is often software, but certainly any hardware. Like if you have servers or that you're using for file storage or to run some aspects of your organization, routers, switches, firewalls, all the things that are used to build networks, they all come with default passwords for the administrator accounts, right? Mm-hmm. And it's usually something really silly, like admin with password default, or something like that, right? Well, unfortunately, not all organizations think to change those, right? They just use the default that comes. Well, those are known passwords and known accounts, right, by all the hackers out there. And so when that's one of the, going back to the vulnerability scan. So you want to make sure all your windows are closed, but if you have any windows open, into your systems, and they can peek in and find a router or a firewall, the first thing these hackers are going to do is test against the known default accounts. And if you haven't changed it, then they're in. It's literally like they just plugged into your network and they're right there and they can control everything. So, very, very important to make sure that your IT staff is changing your default passwords.
No,
Go ahead.
It's one of the things that's nice about some softwares is when the first time you log in, they say, change your password right now. Like you can't go any further. And that makes it so nice. I know I just got a password for a personal account and they're like, we suggest changing your password. And I totally spaced about even changing it. Cause once I was in, I was like, oh,
yeah, you're off and working, right?
Yeah.
Thinking of something else.
So now I got to go write that note down, change password.
Yeah. And of course, those passwords should be complex, right? That's not on this list, but it probably ought to be. Make sure you're using complex passwords. The next one in is patching the operating systems and all of these. So whether it's an operating system, whether it's a network device like a firewall or a router, they all run software on them, right? And they all need to be updated and patched. And that's what a security vendor or a managed service provider can do for you. But patching them timely, like meaning being on top of that, is an important thing. So Microsoft releases security patches regularly, right? At least once a month, but sometimes even more often. And so what that means is they've become aware of some kind of security issue. They've made a fix for it, and they're going to put it out there. So they know about it. There's a good chance that hackers might know about it, depending on how did Microsoft find out about it. They could have found it themselves. They could have found that someone was exploiting something. So now it's pretty much at that point you should assume it's a known thing in the hacker world, right? And so from that point forward, until you've patched your systems, you have a known vulnerability that's not patched that the hackers know, right? So that's why it's important and that's why these organizations like MSPs and managed security providers, that's one of the things they're doing constantly. They're just rolling out patches of everything that you have to keep them right up to date, as secure as possible. Very important to do. The last two, and these can deal with maybe a little bit more on the mobile devices and the laptop side, but laptops, it's a mistake to not have the hard drives encrypted. And so if people lose their hard drive, and even if someone doesn't know how to log into that particular laptop, they could take the hard drive and just start looking at it right themselves and get any piece of data off of it, unless it's encrypted. And Microsoft provides that now. It's called Bitlocker, and it's just it's a configuration switch where as long as you know where to go into, you can go into security settings and say encrypt my storage and turn on that checkbox, and it encrypts it for you.
What does that mean, encrypting? Like I just don't like.
Yeah, encrypting means so plain text. Think of plain text is like in an email, like where I say, hello, Heather, and you can read it. It says, hello, Heather, right? Mm-hmm. Encrypting uses a very complex algorithm that, uses a secret that's unknown and not able to be known, by a malicious person that will turn that into gobbledygook. It's just going to look like symbols and a bunch of nonsense, right? And so it encrypts it. It creates a secret, and it hides everything from the regular viewer. And you have to really know, the system knows how to unencrypt it for your usage, right? But if you're a malicious person that gets in that hasn't logged into that system appropriately, then it's just going to look like gobbledygook to them, and that hides your information from them. Make sense?
Yeah. Yes, but also, aren't they smart enough to like unencrypt it, or is this it like individualized?
Well, that gets into how that works in keys and things like that, and who can see the information and that gets pretty complex, right? But in general, if you're a valid logged in person with a credential, in this in this laptop, then it reveals it to you. But if you're not, if you've gotten to it through some other way, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not an authorized, authenticated user, then it's going to look like gobbledygook to you, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. And then the last one is, so for protecting organizations' information on both laptops and cell phones, because we do so much work now, right, through our cell phones, there are systems out there called MDM, which is mobile device management. And your service providers, your MSPs can easily deploy this for you. But this is software that you put on your phones and your laptops so that you can control them remotely. So that in the event you lose your phone, or someone loses their phone, or they lose their laptop, or it's stolen, the next time those things are turned on, and a phone would have cellular connection, or a laptop might hit Wi-Fi, then you can wipe them, literally delete everything on them remotely, right? So that keeps, even if a nefarious person does get a hold of them, it's like, ooh, I'm going to sneak over here and I'm going to turn on your phone, and I'm going to try to get your contacts out of it. I'm going to see if you stored your passwords in here, whatever they want to do. As soon as it connects to cell, and if it has this MDM management on it, mm-hmm. and we've said, nope, that device is gone, let's have that wiped. As soon as it turns on, it just blows the whole thing away and it doesn't work at all, right? It's a really nice catch-all at the end, for those types of devices. And so with so many remote workers and so many people getting back to travel and all of that, it's really an important thing for organizations to have.
Wow. Okay.
There's the list. Was that enough for you?
That is. And very useful. There are things that I think we all know, but don't really address. And then a lot of hints that we don't know. And I would have never known about encrypting my laptop. I mean, like, I'm writing notes like, change password, backup computer, encrypt my laptop.
Right.
So
right.
It was very helpful. And I really appreciate you spending so much time with our podcast, giving technology updates, because it is the unseen beast to me. Some people are like, I know everything, and that's not me. And yeah. So this is helpful to me, at least.
Well, great. I hope it's helpful to your listeners, and I'm happy to anytime there's a new topic in this area or whatever, and you want to talk more about it, where I am.
Well, if there's a new topic, reach out to me, because I won't know about it, obviously.
Right.
So if you do want to reach out to Brian, you can reach him at BrianScott at ClearToneConsulting.com, or his website at ClearToneConsulting.com. And those will be in the show notes as well, so you don't have to scramble for a pen. And we look forward to talking to you again about some new scary technology thing that you're going to make not so scary to us.
Sounds great, Heather. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.